This week, we're returning to one of our favourite themes, which is graphic execution. And if the viewers are anything to go by, it's one of yours as well. So thank you very much. And if you want to revisit some of the classics in this series, then you can get them all on the icon that's just flipping up above now. Do go check them out. Anyway, this week's chosen method of execution is Tudor favourite, beheading, the nobleman's execution. It's quicker, it's cleaner, it's a more dignified death, supposedly. But as a method of execution, it's not without its own bizarre pitfalls and eccentricities, and it's these that we're going to look at today. So, this is a method of execution reserved for the gentry and the nobility. It's the first class carriage to the afterlife if you have to go there. You had to be a close and personal friend of the king to be beheaded on Tower Green, you know. And this does give us a problem in England, because what beheading requires is a skilled executioner. You can't just give this job to anyone who owns an axe. And skilled executioners are not really something Britain has until after beheading has stopped being a thing. For example, when Henry VIII ordered the execution of famous second wife Anne Boleyn, he hired in a specialist executioner from France who could do the job in one swift stroke with a sword without error. Fairly sure that there are plenty of other thoughts that she wished he would have, but this does highlight the issue quite neatly. When a man's so powerful, he's told the Pope where to go, can't find a decent headsman in his own backyard, we've got a problem. Have you ever seen that Blackadder special in the Civil War with Charles I, and you recall that they won't let Baldric be the executioner for fear of him hacking away with that penknife he owns? Well, this isn't actually too far removed from the truth. If we take the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, who might be an enemy of the state, the debate does still continue on that one, but she was still a member of the royal family. She was first cousin once removed to Elizabeth I. So she was family, and she was the rightful monarch of another country. Remember, we don't have a Great Britain until 1707. If you're going to execute someone like this, then you had better do it cleanly and professionally. Murdering a monarch you hold as a prisoner is one thing. We can see Edward IV, Henry IV, Richard III, if you're of that mind. But you can get away with that. Executing a monarch is a whole different ballgame. Unfortunately for Mary, her executioner, a man called Bull, was, shall we say, less than competent. His first blow missed her neck and hit the back of her head. And that didn't kill her. Just think about that for a moment. That's awful. So he struck again. This time it did kill her, but it still didn't sever the head. Bull ended up having to saw through the remaining tissue with the axe to sever the head. Now, this is a botched execution, but let's give the executioner a bit of credit that history has denied him, shall we? There is a persistent rumour that following the severing of the head, Bull lifted the head by the hair and then dropped it as Mary was wearing a wig. There just isn't evidence to support this. The most famous account of the execution is that of Robert Winkfelder, who wrote the following description. He lifted up her head to the view of all the assembly and bade God save the Queen. Then, her dress of lawn falling from off her head, it appeared as grey as one of 70 years old, pulled very short. The wig certainly fell off her head, but there's no account of Bull actually dropping it. You don't get to be an executioner of monarchs, even a bad one, when you're making that sort of error. And while Bull can take his place in history as residing over a farce, we don't need to make it more farcical than it actually was. With this sort of pressure to perform, you can see why nobody really wanted to be an executioner. At the execution of the Earl of Kilmarnock in 1746, according to the account in the Gentleman's Magazine, the executioner needed something administering to prevent him from fainting. Then the public scenes just became too much for him and he burst into tears. In the end, he had to be comforted and reassured by the very man he was there to behead. He ended up paying him 5 guineas to do a good job. and it still took 2 blows. So in order to make things much easier on the executioners and generally cleaner and more accurate, particularly if you're doing a large number of executions, then of course we have to look to France, the late 18th century, and Dr. Guillotine. Yes? No. If you're wanting to look at the history of the guillotine, then we've got to start looking at the picturesque Yorkshire town of Halifax, what we believe to be the late 13th century, and the Halifax Gibbet. Now basically, under the manor of Wakefield in the early Middle Ages, the Lord had the power to execute thieves who stole to the value of more than 13.5 pence. If you look at this quote from the laws, if a felon be taken within their liberty or precincts of the said forest, the forest of Hardwick, either hand-harband, caught with stolen goods in his hand or in the act of stealing them, back-barand, caught carrying stolen goods on the back, or confessand, having confessed to the crime, cloth or any other commodity to the value of 13.5 pence, that they shall after 3 market days or meeting days within the town of Halifax after such his apprehension, and being condemned, he shall be taken to the gibbet and there have his head cut off from his body. Now it's worth pointing out here as well that this law requires just 2 pieces of evidence. Number 1, were stolen goods found on the dependent's person? And number 2, were those goods worth more than 13.5 pence? If the answer to both of those questions was yes, then it's off with the head. You didn't have to have stolen them yourself, and you didn't even need to know they were stolen. Now, the device used to execute was a device that was unique to England at the time, and it resembles this. Look familiar? This is a 17th century engraving of the Halifax Gibbet, so we can prove beyond reasonable doubt that Halifax had it before France. It's a wooden structure where an axe blade is wedged into a heavy block of wood which runs down grooves. The block is secured by rope and a pin, and when the pin is removed, the block and the blade come crashing down, severing the neck with one stroke. Now the pin would be attached to a rope, which was then attached to a horse or an ox. In this way, the condemned was technically killed by the animal rather than a common man, and therefore it didn't put any souls in mortal danger. So they thought of everything, hadn't they? However, one contemporary account from Ralph Holinshead in 1586 adds a level of audience participation to the proceedings. Unto the midst of which pin is also there is a long rope fastened that cometh down among the people, so that when the offender has made his confession and hath laid his neck over the nethermost block, every man there present doth either take hold of the rope or putteth forth his arm so near to the same as he can get, in token that he is willing to see true justice executed. And pulling out the pin in this manner, the head block wherein the axe is fastened doth fall down with such violence that if the neck of the transgressor were so big as that of a bull, it should be cut in sunder at a stroke and roll from the body by a huge distance. So there you have it, an audience interactive public execution, because if nothing else, Yorkshire folk do like to get hands on. Now, because we don't have a record of precisely when it was built, we can't truly say how old it really is. We can start the timeline from the first execution we've been able to identify with it, which was John of Dalton in 1286, and from there until its last recorded use in 1650, prior to being outlawed by Cromwell. It has executed over 100 people that we know of. After 1650, it was dismantled, but a replica stands in the same site on Gibbet Street in Halifax today, and the blade you can see in it is cast from the actual gibbet blade at the time of the dismantling, and that blade from 1650 is on display in the Bankfield Museum at the other side of the town. We'll put a link in the comments below to the museum in both there and the description. Now, Halifax may well be the first, but it isn't the only beheading machine that we know about. The original Maiden is currently on display in the National Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, and we know that that was in use between 1564 and 1710, well before the use we have of the guillotine with the French Revolution. But of course, the guillotine itself would be made legendary by France throughout the French Revolution and beyond. Not only were they somewhat late to the automated beheading party, but the guillotine is one of those things that's a lot less historical than you think. And I'm leaving you with this. The last guillotining in France was done on the 10th of September 1977. That's within my lifetime. In fact, that's 4 months after the release of Star Wars. Think about that. The last man to have his head removed by a guillotine was 4 months after the first man to have his arm removed by a lightsaber. I'm not sure I'll ever get past that fact. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.